Hello and welcome to our second lecture under Module 1. And today we will discuss climate change adaptation, basic concepts and approaches. We'll have two topics for this lecture. First, basic concepts, and secondly, approaches to climate change adaptation. So let's begin by defining several important terms that you will encounter throughout this online course. The first term is climate change impacts. These refer to the effects of climate change on natural or human systems. Depending on the consideration of adaptation, one can distinguish between two types of impacts. One is the potential impacts. These are impacts that may occur given a projected change in climate without considering adaptation. On the other hand, residual impacts are impacts of climate change that would occur after adaptation. So note the first one is without considering adaptation, whereas in the first one, these are impacts after adaptation has been implemented. Another term is sensitivity. It is the degree to which a system is affected either adversely or beneficially, in other words, positive or negative, by climate variability or change. The effect may be A, direct, such as, for example, a change in crop yield in response to a change in the mean, range, or variability of temperature. Or it can be indirect, such as damages caused by an increase in the frequency of coastal flooding due to sea level rise. Another important term to note is resilience. It is the ability of a social or ecological or natural system to absorb disturbances while retaining the same basic structure and ways of functioning, the capacity for self-organization, and the capacity to adapt to stress or change. Think of it like a rubber band, where it immediately goes back into its original shape after being changed. Vulnerability is another concept. It is the degree to which a system is susceptible to and unable to cope with adverse effects of climate change, including climate variability and extremes. For example, we note that it is a function of the character, magnitude, and rate of climate change and variation to which a system is exposed, its sensitivity, as well as its adaptive capacity. Now, adaptation refers to the adjustment in natural or human systems in response to actual or expected climate stimuli or their effects, which moderates harm or exploits beneficial opportunities. Again, we may classify adaptation into several categories. First is anticipatory adaptation. It is adaptation that takes place before the impacts of climate change are observed, and thus it is also referred to as proactive adaptation. On the other hand, planned adaptation is the result of a deliberate policy decision based on an awareness that conditions have changed or are about to change, and that action is required to return to, maintain, or achieve a desired state. Another term is autonomous adaptation. It is adaptation that does not constitute a conscious response to climate stimuli, but is triggered by ecological changes in natural systems and by market or welfare changes in human systems. And so it is also referred to as spontaneous adaptation. Next, adaptive capacity. It is the ability of a system to adjust to climate change, including variability and extremes, to moderate potential damages, to take advantage of opportunities, or to cope with the consequences. Now, adaptation benefits are the avoided damage costs or the accrued benefits following the adoption and implementation of adaptation measures. We can put this in a formula like this. Vulnerability V is a function of E, exposure, S, sensitivity, and AC, adaptive capacity, including adaptation measures. E, or exposure, refers to the exposure of a system of interest to stimuli that act on that system. So these are climate variability and or the various changes in the climate system, such as temperature increases, rainfall variability and change, or changes in the frequency or intensity of tropical cyclones. Well, S, or sensitivity, refers to the responsiveness, as we have seen earlier, of a system to climate hazards. The more sensitive a system, the larger the rate of magnitude of an adverse response to a given hazard. Sensitivity may vary considerably from one system, sector, or population to another. And then adaptive capacity, that refers to the ability of a system to change in a way that makes it better equipped to manage its exposure and or sensitivity to climate influences. So these three factors will determine the vulnerability of the system under this equation. Okay, now let's go to approaches to climate change adaptation. This will not be exhaustive. Our intention here is just to give you some idea of what are some of the basic and important approaches that have been used in climate change adaptation. Okay, first let's look at possible adaptation measures. Well, number one, it may surprise some of you, but farmers, fisher folks, and people can simply do nothing. In other words, just bear the losses. If the losses are acceptable, people may actually choose not to adapt. Second, we can share losses among a wider community. For example, extended families who can assist each other so that the loss of each family is less, as opposed to if they would adapt by themselves. Third, we can modify the threat. If there's a degree of control over the threat, for example, flood control can be modified through certain infrastructure. Fourth, we can also prevent the effects. For example, changing crop management, such as provision of irrigation if there's water deficit. Fifth, change the use, such as, for example, changing the crop to a more drought-tolerant crop. And then we can also change location of economic activities, say shifting from one province or state to another. Now, we can look at climate change adaptation as either from a top-down approach or secondly, from a bottom-up approach. So here, we would like to start first with a top-down approach. And here are the following steps, or the following are the steps that we can use using the top-down approach. Step number one, collect and review existing hydromet or observational data, say of temperature, rainfall, wind. Step two, choose a global climate change model. These are models that generate future climate scenarios of temperature, of precipitation. And then third, try out, fine-tune, and localize the modeling process so that it is applicable to your target area or even country. Step four, generate climate scenarios to get a snapshot of possible futures. Step five, analyze what these scenarios mean for the evolution of risks in specific sectors of the economy, such as agriculture, health, natural ecosystems, or biodiversity. And then step six, decide how priority risks can best be addressed, financed, or supported by targeted policy action. So that is the top-down approach. Now second, let's also look at an example of a bottom-up approach to climate change adaptation. And here we want to focus on the no-regrets measures. Others will call them win-win, or measures that whatever happens will lead to benefits to the community. Element number one of a bottom-up approach, promoting or anticipating resilient design. Two, enabling and encouraging adaptive management. Third, developing policies that create resilient systems. Four, climate-proofing human development projects and programs. We will have more to say on this in the third lecture. And then element number five, oops, that's too fast, sorry.